So we are live now. It's 8 o'clock.
Hello there.
Hello, everyone. And let me pause. Let me pause Facebook so that we're not, double looking here and there. I just want to focus on you today. And I want to preference this. I'm here today. My name is Dr. Sylvia Lloyd, and I'm here with Dr. Yolanda Sealey-Ruiz, who is an associate professor at Columbia University Teachers College. And this is huge, not just for me to be speaking with you, but for the Black community, because we may not know that we have Black professors in Ivy League colleges, because we know about Dr. Cornel West. Like Dr. Cornel West, he taught at Harvard and Princeton. He's a big freaking deal, in the Black community. He's a big deal. But it's like just one person, or maybe two people. But we don't know about, you on a large national worldwide scale. Well, educators do, but I'm just saying, in mainstream media. And it's so important that we celebrate, our Black woman first and foremost.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you, Dr.
Yes.
Sylvia, my sister.
Yes, thank you. And we need to know that we exist, on this level, in these spaces. And just to preference a little bit more before I let you speak on your research, Columbia is a big freaking deal because four U.S. presidents graduated from Columbia. For those who are watching, if you're not familiar with who those four presidents are, look it up. But yes. I'll give you one. One is Barack Obama. A young Barack Obama was a student at Columbia. So,
and a president, one of the presidents was actually a president of Columbia, and that is Dwight Eisenhower. And
so if you gave away the second president.
If you go into the Butler Library, there are all these pictures on the wall, of course, and there's a picture there of Dwight Eisenhower, who we don't know if it's myth or not. We believe it's true. His mother was Black. And so there's a lot. Oh, absolutely. There's a lot that we don't know because so much of our history has been erased and not taught in schools. But Barack Obama. Yay.
Barack Obama.
Miss him every day.
Yes. He was so great and he was graceful and he just did his thing.
He did.
And he appointed the first Latina Supreme Court justice.
From the Bronx.
Sonia
Sotomayor. Yes.
So you're from the Bronx, for people who don't know. So just tell us a little bit about your upbringing. Like, how do you, come from the Bronx and make it to, Ivy League professor?
I would love to answer that by reading the poem, The Bronx, out of love from the Vortex.
Okay.
But to answer the question as well, I did write a short essay a couple of years ago. I think, Dr. Sylvia, it is the only essay I've ever written that had no changes at all. Because for those of us who are in the academy, it is very standard that you write articles, you write essays, and you submit them. And there's always some sort of change. They want you to, make editorial changes or consider different citations.
Right.
But this was the only essay, and I was a doctoral student at the time. And I wrote the article. It's called Getting to Here from There, One Woman's Journey from the Bronx, to the Academy. I might have been actually a professor at Kingsborough Community College at the time. That was my first tenure track position. And I thank you for asking the question because not much was expected from anyone coming from the South Bronx specifically, and certainly not little Black girls and little Black boys.
Right.
Although the Bronx has such a rich history and tradition of lawyers and folks who have come out of it.
Yeah.
So it was a long journey, I'll be honest with you, because I feel that many of my teachers cared about me, but the education, as now we see in particular zip codes, are not, let's say that my zip code, 10456, was not the same level of education on, say, Scarsdale,
right,
Westchester, or other areas of the Bronx.
Right.
And so when you have all of that working against you, even growing up in a home with loving parents who believed deeply in education and pushed us, you're just not getting what you deserve. And so it was a long journey. I happen to have loved books, loved, reading. And when my parents, had strife, which parents do for
Oh, yeah.
money reasons and so forth, education, books was the way that I escaped, and notably poetry. And I'm just coming to understand that now. I didn't realize until I was being interviewed a couple of weeks ago how I use poetry really to thrive and survive. So
Wow.
that's what it meant to grow up in the Bronx. And I'd love to read The Bronx, circa 1983. It's on page 145,
Okay.
if you'd like to read along.
Yes.
And again, I'm reading from Love from the Vortex. And thank you so much for purchasing it and for supporting it.
Oh, you are very welcome. It's my pleasure.
So the Bronx, circa 1983. I am always thinking of that place, the hood that nurtured me and helped to shape me into the woman I am and becoming. I have always held you close, wrapped in my arms of blazing fire and ashes. I knew you before you knew yourself. I saved you when others wanted to throw you back to the ashes from which you rose. And like a phoenix, you came rising and rushing towards the midnight sky.
Wow.
Thank you. And what I'm referencing, 1983 is very specific. That was the height of the crack epidemic. And it hit my particular South Bronx neighborhood very harsh and very deeply. And we know how drugs were pushed into particular communities, Black communities, Latinx communities.
Right.
So 1983, while it was a beautiful moment, let's say in music and in culture, hip hop and so forth, it was a devastating time for many of us because of the drugs that were pushed in our neighborhood. And when I talk about the blazing fire and ashes, 1983 was also a time where the Bronx was trying to come out of a decade of fire, a decade where landlords, predominantly Jewish and Italian, began to burn down their property, collect the insurance, and move away because more and more Black and Latinos, Latinx, folks were moving into the neighborhood. So the Bronx used to be very diverse: Italians, Jewish, Irish, Black, Puerto Rican, specifically Puerto Rican. And when we began to come in more and more, the owners of the buildings, they wanted out. They did not want to live with us. And so it was their white flight, but they wanted to cash out before they flew the coop. And so Vivian Vasquez is an incredible documentarian who captures this in her film, A Decade of Fire, how the Bronx was burning. And that came out about 3 or 4 years ago. So that's worth looking into. And there's a great history museum in the Bronx as well. I forget exactly where it is, over near the Grand Concourse. You know, the Bronx has such a rich and beautiful history, a painful one in some ways, but also a rich and beautiful one.
Yeah, and I lived there for a few years.
Did you? Really?
Yeah, I taught in the Bronx, yes. And I think it's just one of the most beautiful boroughs because it's so park-like. Park-like. You know, and just about every area you go in, it seems like it's all connected with, beautiful greenery. Yes. And it feels suburban almost.
It does. Too. It does. Yeah. It does feel suburban. If you look at photos of the Bronx back in the day, like most places, Queens and Brooklyn as well, but there were a lot of farms and there was a lot of greenery.
No, I didn't know that.
The Bronx is a beautiful borough. And so thank you for allowing me to talk about it. And I'm glad that you lived there for a time. I'm glad you taught there too.
Oh, it was one of the most thrilling experiences. I mean, it really was. And it's the first time, because I'm originally from Buffalo. It's the first time students asked me, where are you from? And Buffalo was not the answer they were looking for.
What do you think they expected? What did they expect?
They wanted to know what country. They told me. They said, no, miss, where are you from?
Wow.
And I was like, Puerto Rico.
So
Because I'm like third generation, I don't claim to be Puerter Rican, and I was raised in Black culture, and
right.
my grandparents were an interracial couple. So we
Beautiful.
were raised, you take on the language of your mother, and your grandmother.
Absolutely. Oh
So,
my goodness.
so I don't speak Spanish, but they looked at me and they were like,
They saw
no.
Boricua. They saw Boricua. They're like, yeah, you are Boricua. That's beautiful. My
Right.
ex-husband is Boricua, a part
Yeah.
Boricua. So
Yes.
absolutely.
Like almost like Afro Latino.
Absolutely
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yes. So, I mean, that was just a wonderful conversation on the Bronx. And, that was one of the best experiences of my life. It
Beautiful.
helped shape me too. So I can just imagine what it was like, growing up there. Yeah. And
Very special.
you said your escape was poetry. Like, do you have any favorite poets, or what you recommend that we read? Anyone in particular?
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that question. And since we're still in April and it is still Poetry Month, what I've done on my IG, just as a way to pay homage to, poets, you see this book behind me. Jacqueline Woodson is actually a poet. Her book, Brown Girl Dreaming, is really, it's like a novel, but written in verse. But I do have on my IG this month, I actually need to update it, but Rita Dove, of course, Maya Angelou, of course, June Jordan, very important poet in my life.
Really?
Langston Hughes, absolutely an
Yes.
important poet. Nikki Giovanni, such an important poet in my life. Alice Walker wrote some beautiful poems. One that I actually cite in here just by title, called Never Give Your Heart to a Man Who Eats Hearts.
Wow.
So that's part of a beautiful poem. Toni Morrison wrote about 5 poems. She, of course, mostly wrote novels, but those are the poets that influenced me and inspired me the most. Of course, Gwendolyn Brooks. And then there's contemporary poets like Aja Monet and certainly Mahogany Brown, who has a new YA book written in verse called Chlorine Sky. And so, Eve Ewing is another amazing contemporary poet. So I'm very, very inspired by poets, contemporary and past.
Well, I haven't heard of a few of those, so you're putting me on to some new poets. Thank you.
You're welcome.
When I read this book, many of the poems remind me of like a Jill Scott song.
Ooh.
And I know she's a poet. She's a spoken word poet.
She is indeed a poet. She is indeed. You know what? I'm gonna have to throw Jill Scott into the mix too, because that's also part of what encouraged me to. This is also an Audible book, Dr. Sylvia. I don't know if you know that, but
yes, I do.
And set to music and original music and set to sound. But I also have 2 playlists because I live my life through music. And so when I was going through a lot of the experiences in the Vortex, music is what actually soothed my soul and got me through. And so on Spotify, I have one playlist that's called Love from the Vortex and another playlist called Yoli in the Vortex. So I don't think Jill Scott made either one of them, but she's a powerful sister.
Oh, yes. Because I'll be reading some of these poems like, that face come on like.
Yes. That's like, exactly it.
Yes. Like this is real talk.
I went in, and thank you for saying that. I didn't hold back. It healed me. And I felt that if it could heal me, perhaps it could heal others. And that was at the heart of releasing it, because it really wrote itself. I didn't sit down and say, I'm going to write a book of poetry. It's never hit me in that way. And I recognized the vulnerability. I recognized the openness. But I knew that I had to release it if I was going to be authentic to myself.
And I'm so glad you did.
Thank
So
you
thank
for saying
you.
that. You're welcome.
Yes, it
Thank
is
you.
vulnerable. All art is vulnerable, whenever you're sharing your
Yes.
soul. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Yes.
And I mean, I see how, you became a teacher from that, because I've been trained as an educator. But
Yes.
for those who may not know, like how did you become, a teacher? What made you go into teaching? So of course,
Mm-hmm.
love of literature, that shows through, even as a child, no one had to tell you, read a poem,
Right.
that was your healing.
Right.
So yeah.
Wow. You are asking, first of all, thank you for your show.
Aw.
Thank you for the work that you're doing on this show. And thank you for these amazing questions.
Aw.
I knew from the time I was 13 that I wanted
Mm,
to be a teacher.
mm,
And what prevented me from going into teaching right away, I went into corporate America for about 13 years
mm.
first, because folks were saying things like, teachers don't make money. Why do you want to be a teacher?
Right.
And honestly, growing up, very modest means, we didn't consider ourselves poor, although people would definitely have called us that. Uh, um, I was swayed by that. And I thought, you know what, I need to get a job. I need to help my family. I want to have, the sacrifices my mom and dad made, let me build on that so that I could have something a little bit more. And so that's why I chose corporate America, even though from the time I was 13, it was a calling. That's the only way that I can describe it.
Mm.
It was a calling. I just felt drawn to that career. So even while I was in corporate America, particularly my first corporate job working for the New York Times, I figured out a way, number one, to go back to school to get my master's in teaching.
Mhm.
And I was teaching high school at night. Like
Mm.
there's this calling that I had to be in the classroom. So
Mhm.
I'm so glad that I paid attention to that.
Yes.
And so I've been teaching for 29 years. This is my 29th year
Wow.
teaching while I was working in corporate, while I was here in the academy at Teachers College, still teaching high school. Um, it's just something that I feel my spirit has to do.
I'm glad you didn't miss your calling. And I'm glad you didn't stay in corporate America,
Me too.
because look what you shared. I haven't read all of your books, but there's so much there, that I need to go back and read and reread. Um, and your research on, because not everyone who goes into education ends up where you are, as a tenured professor.
Right.
First and foremost, getting tenure, is grueling.
Oof.
um, and then to be invited all over the world to speak. And how did you get there? You know what
Mm.
I mean? It was no easy feat. I know.
But can I tell you, even hearing you say it, it's so humbling to be seen in that way. Because I'll tell you honestly, the work that I do, what drives me is my love for my people. And I'm grateful when people invite me because I'm going to talk about love. I'm going to talk about the beauty of Blackness. I'm going to talk about the inequalities that we've faced because of racism, because of inequality. So people know what I'm going to talk about when I show up. The fact that I keep getting invited is what I'm most grateful for. So
Oh.
I think it started just when I was working actually under Pedro Noguera at the NYU Metro Center for Urban Education. So I was a research associate. I was the first postdoc for the center that's now being run by headed up by David Kirkland.
Mhm.
And part of my job there was to, yes, do research, but also to deliver what is called professional development or professional learning. And specifically with school districts that were highly or disproportionately classifying Black and Latinx students in special education. So it was something
Mm.
very specific. And so Metro Center would get contracts from the state, and our job was to work with teachers to help them look at their IEP, their individualized education plan process, and declassify these children that did not belong in special education.
That's huge.
It's huge. And especially when you find out that special education, in terms of funding, schools were getting 2 to 3 times the amount per student for special education. And some schools were taking, putting Black and brown bodies in special ed to get the funding, and taking some of that funding and creating gifted education programs for white students.
Wow.
So there was just so much that was going on. And I think having to do that kind of professional learning, which was tough. I remember my colleague and I would sometimes go to school districts. We were the only Black people in the room. Of a room of 300 or 400, or maybe it was that one Black teacher in the district. And we were talking about very openly racism. And so there was a boldness that I had to have, Dr. Sylvia. And I had to really understand my voice around this. And that was the beginning. And, and then my trajectory went into TC, and I would be called, part of being a professor and is to say, hey, can you come and talk about this article? Can you be on this panel? And so it was just, I think, a natural progression. But I have to give props to, my work at Metro Center, working under Dr. Pedro Noguera, and doing that kind of work in school districts.
Well, you must have done it well.
Thank you. That, I would get really good evaluations, even when people disagreed with what I said. And I always worked on the premise that even when folks invited me on my own outside of Metro Center, I said, I have to go in and I have to tell the truth as I understand it. And I always said, I understand this may be my first and last time.
Wow.
And so
that was at NYU?
This was at NYU, but then I would begin to be invited outside of it, for, money that would go in my own pocket. I was doing the work for NYU. And then as I began to write, people would invite me. And so I still feel that way. What has changed, though, is as I developed this theory of, racial literacy development and archaeology of self, love is such a crucial part of it that I think people are intrigued. How is she talking about racism, calling us on our racism, and doing so through a lens of love? And it's powerful because there's so many scholars before me, Sean Jenwright, Bell Hooks, Paulo Freire, that talks about the importance of love in education. So I didn't invent this, I just found my path to it. And I think when in the world that we live in now more than ever, we need to hear about love. So I think that is what's increasing, my popularity, if you call that in that way, that people want to learn about how do you become anti-racist, and they want to learn about what is the role of love and loving our students in this process.
Yeah, because it's not what you say, it's how you say it.
Absolutely. My grandmother used to say that. And
yes. While you were at NYU, did you have any other mentors, or was there anyone who, molded you?
Yes, I would have to say Dr. Suzanne Carruthers, flat out, absolutely. She was a professor for 40 years. And she retired about 3 years ago. She was at City University for about 25 years. Certainly Dr. Oliver Patterson, the father of the brilliant George Patterson, who's running the My Brother's Keeper program. He was definitely a mentor and gave me a lot of courage. These were Black men and women, very few professors at NYU. And they gave me a model on how I could walk with courage and be bold. And so I would have to say Dr. Suzanne Carruthers, Dr. Oliver Patterson, and in some ways, Dr. Pedro Noguera, who was my boss at Metro Center, was a role model for me as well, in the way that he took very complex, ideas around zip code analysis and racism and race, and he presented it in works that people could read and understand. And that's important because in the academy, and this, we're kind of taught to write about folks, and these folks can't read the stuff that we're writing about them, and that's wrong. And and Cornel West at one point said, I have to write, if I'm writing about my people, I also have to write for my people, and I want my grandmother, I might be paraphrasing, but I want my grandmother to be able to read what I write. And I've always wanted to be that kind of writer, that if my grandmother or my 16-year-old daughter, or my, I don't know, my 9-year-old nephew would pick it up, that they can get something out of it. I don't want to write in a language that's not natural to me, that keeps others out. That's not why I'm in the academy. My job is to let as many in as
Right.
possible. And I think I need to do that as a model through my own work.
And that's scholarship. That's true scholarship. Because
Yes,
anyone
thank you.
can talk about it, but can you
Right.
write about it?
Can you write, and can you write about it in a way that's accessible and inviting,
Right.
to include other people in, and not just folks
Yeah.
that have doctorate degrees. You know,
Right.
it's a lot of work, these degrees that we have gotten, but it's not about keeping people out. It's about
Right.
bringing people in.
Interesting.
Mhm.
And you mentioned George Patterson. He's one of the co-founders of BU, Black Influencers United, along with Dr. Shango Blake and David Banks and Bernard Gassaway.
Yes,
And
amazing brothers.
yes, and that's kind of like what you just summed up is like the mission, the agenda of BU. You
Mm,
know, like how do we tear down those walls and support other Black educators, and also tear down those walls of white supremacy
yes.
that shows up in our curriculum, in K-12 education, and how we teach our children. And that's also something that Dr. Gholdy Muhammad, talked
Yes.
about, how there's white supremacy in the curriculum and the
Everywhere.
teacher evaluation
And the
and
teacher ed programs.
the teacher
We were
ed
talking,
program.
I know we were talking a little bit before. I
Yes.
just want to open up to you,
Yeah.
because you had like some brilliant thoughts and questions. But yes, the Eurocentricity is in the
Yeah.
teacher ed programs through and through.
Yes, it is. And one thing that when I was in higher ed, one thing that we noticed, and I worked in a central office in higher ed, I was the director of libraries, but we
Wow.
had like a cross-functional meeting every Thursday. So all of the directors would get together, with the superintendents, and these long, boring meetings.
Yes.
But that's something that
Yes.
often came up. We had to create a P16 committee. And the P16 committee was to bring K-12 people and professors in higher education, teacher preparation programs together at the same table and talk about, we had to talk about why are we having to retrain teachers? The school district would have to spend, this was up in Buffalo,
Yeah.
the school district would have to spend thousands of dollars, every year on
Sure.
professional development. And, we had to figure out, how can we train these teachers for these unique issues, these unique urban issues,
Yes.
in teacher preparation programs before they get to us? Why are we having to retrain teachers? And I know that's not an issue in every district, but it was certainly one, in the district I worked at. Is that still a thing? Is there there?
Oh, there is a there, right there. And, even in, and I'll say two things, even in a place like Teachers College, teacher education programs are not doing a great service by sending our students out. Now, one thing being prepared, one thing I will say, and I give props to my colleagues in my English ed program, in the last 2 years, they really have reconceptualized it. Because at one point I felt I was kind of the only one talking about diversity. And of course, teaching the diversity course that was created by one of my senior colleagues. But, there needs to be more than just the course. And so these 3 colleagues of mine really took on this idea of, before our students even take classes, they need an experience where we're talking about these issues. And I have to say that I'm so proud to be part of that. That is unique. I think that, yes, there's other places, Santa Clara, there's places in Berkeley, there's other places that have kind of social justice written in their mission. But for the most part, these teacher education programs are not challenging or teaching about issues of race, class, gender, and why? Because most of the teacher educators are white. They have not gone through their own kind of education in doing this.
Right.
And so they don't see the value. They don't see the importance. They've not done their own archaeological self-dig around these issues. So they're unable to engage their teacher education candidates in this work. which is so crucial, particularly when they're going into schools with predominantly Black, Asian, and Latinx students. So the there is there is there. And the hope is that with the Biden-Harris administration, and it's now a curse, no longer a curse word to say equity or white supremacy,
Right.
right? And monies will be flowing to some of these teacher education programs. The hope is that they will kind of take this up and take it seriously and make some changes.
Absolutely. Yeah. And
Yeah,
you
thank you for
mentioned
that.
the arc of self, well, the archaeology of the self, but on your website it's the arc of self. And what is that all about? Like, I looked at it and I was like, wow, powerful concept.
Thank you, thank you. Arc of Self is actually the name of my education consulting company. And so again, Dr. Sylvia, just seeing how my professional life, like I am who I am in the classroom, I am who I am outside of the classroom. And so even with Love from the Vortex, that is my artifact from my archaeological dig on love and intimacy. So this is a lens that I use for my teaching, my facilitation, my life as a mother, as a lover, as a daughter. And so Arc of Self, which is short of for Archaeology of Self, it's, you know, I haven't created it. I mean, it exists certainly in mindfulness, it exists in philosophy. Even in education, it's probably seen or known as kind of this self-reflective practitioner. But it hasn't been, I don't think, theorized in the way that I have been theorizing and working it through with my dear friend, Dr. Angela Costa. And that is really inviting teachers to do a deep dive and to really excavate where these issues of the issues of bias and racism and hate and phobias, like excavate it out of you. And what I'm saying is replace it with critical love. Really doing that deep work to, you know, find out where these issues live within. And I learned a lot of that from my mentor, Dr. Suzanne Carruthers. And I just came along and, you know, kind of with the help of Dr. Angela Costa, put a model to it. And, you know, went a little bit deeper on the theory and then began to build workshop experiences around each of the 6 components of the racial literacy development model, of which the archaeology of the self is one component.
Oh, wow.
So that's the business. That's the business behind Arc of Self. And it's my company's name, as well as the theory that I engage in myself and also engage others in.
Beautiful, beautiful. And just recently, maybe about a month ago, you gave a professional development to the teachers, all of the teachers in the DOE, the Department of Education in New York City.
Yes.
And was it on racial literacy? Or like, what was that about? I heard a little bit of it, but.
Sure. It was it was a component of racial literacy development, the component of critical love. And I spoke, and it was, I'm so grateful to the new chancellor, Misha Porter, where she invited me to talk to like over 1,700 principals.
Wow.
And I talked about the need, the urgency, the importance of critical love in school leadership. And I shared the development model. I shared the idea of critical love as I have been theorizing it, what it affords us, how we have to do that self-work, and then invite teachers within our school, their schools, to do that self-work, and the teachers then invite the students to do that self-work. So then it becomes this domino effect. But the leaders are the ones that have to get that charge going. They have to set that ethos in the school for the teachers to understand, this is how we do it in this building, and this is how I must do it in my classroom.
It starts at the top.
It starts at the top.
Trickles down.
Absolutely, period, full stop.
And this is such a paradigm shift, because in education, usually it's what's wrong with these kids. And, you know, it's always on the onus is on the children and maybe their parents or their families or their community, the Black community. You know, like what's wrong with them? They can't get it. You know, it's them, and not us.
Wow.
So to turn that lens around and say, you know, what can we do? You know, it's such a big change.
I just had a light bulb moment in listening to you.
Oh.
Thank you for that analysis. I didn't really think about it. Yes, the self-work, but I didn't think about it in that way, that is actually interrupting, which interruption is also a component of the racial literacy development model, is interrupting the status quo of that narrative. That it's them, them, them. And what I'm saying is, oop, turn the finger and start with you.
Wow.
So thank you for that analysis. If I ever write about it, I will cite the show. I will cite this moment, this beautiful personal conversation that we've been having.
Thank you. Wow.
Yes.
Make me feel special.
You are indeed.
Yeah, and after 2020, you know, with the racial uprising, you know, after the murder of George Floyd, and you know, everyone being home watching it, racial literacy and equity, you know, have, like you said, become now commonplace. Now we can talk about white supremacy, and we know that you know, you mentioned the colleges you taught at, so NYU, and then you know, Columbia, and Columbia is known to have some type of racial issues, because I know when I watched the Barack Obama story,
yes,
one story about his life, you know, a biopic, and it showed him, you know, coming to Columbia as a young Black student and being harassed by some campus security.
terrible.
And constantly stalking him. You know, every time he stepped on campus, you know, they would approach him, ask him what he was doing there, you know, as if he didn't belong there. And, you know, I
if they only knew they were talking to the future president of the United States.
That part.
That part.
Yeah. So we know that, you know, racism is a part of the fabric of America, the beginning of this country, of course. But in institutions, you know, such as Columbia, you know, that are Ivy League and predominantly white.
Yes.
How did you navigate that, and just not navigate that, but so beautifully, powerfully, you know, advance it successfully there?
Well, first I want to give all glory to God for everything in my life. That's the first thing. First and foremost, I want to say that.
Yeah.
I thank God for every path that He's put me on, and that I'm grateful to myself that I'm not afraid to travel the paths. See, that's part of it too, that we have to believe, you know, that we belong and that we deserve to travel that path. And I really want to thank my sister, and I don't think I ever told her this, but while growing up, she would always call me like BBBS, my beautiful, brilliant baby sister. That you're going to do great things. You're going to be do amazing things. And you know, she said it over and over and over and over. And I think I began to believe it. I began to believe it. Like, yes, I'm going to do great things. And so I want to thank my sister for sure. And this is the power of speaking affirmatively into someone's life. You don't know how it's going to impact them, but if you do it consistently enough, they may start believing it.
I love that story.
So I believe, thank you, Dr. Sylvia, that I definitely believed it. And I'm also a risk taker. I don't know why I'm not afraid. I don't know if it's the Bronx that raised me, when you know, people don't expect too much.
Right.
And you're constantly surprising them. You just, like James Baldwin, you go for broke. Yeah. So I've always been that type of person to not be afraid to apply for that corporate job, apply for that position. Even coming to Teachers College, I was supposed to just be there for 18 months. Wow. But you know,
really?
I came as a research associate. I did not initially come on tenure track. And at the end of my 18 months, I want to tell you, I had only one publication. But I think what really made my case so strong is over 25 students wrote letters talking about how my teaching impacted them. And I think because I had already been there for a year and a half, I had this one publication that was doing very well. And the students, in that case, the students really spoke. And that helped me.
Yeah.
That helped me. And it's just been a beautiful ride so far. It's been a tough ride. I'm not saying it's been easy. But it's just
Yeah.
been beautiful. And I just want to, for those out there who are listening,
Yeah.
just don't cut yourself off from dreams. Don't cut yourself off from challenges. Like if the challenge presents itself, walk into it. You'll get through it. And if you don't get fully to the other side, you certainly will not be the same because of the experiences that you'll have when you do get to the other side. So you may
And
as well go for it.
that's the freedom dream that you
That's the
often
freedom
talk
dream.
about, and Dr. Muhammad talks about, and Dr. Bettina Love talks about freedom dreaming.
Right. And giving props to Robin D.G. Kelly, want to say he actually has a beautiful book, Freedom Dreams, that I used in my Black Lives Matter course. And so this is the whole thing. We build on each other. And Dr. Sylvia, I want to say one more thing to you about having this platform, that we cannot do this work really without you, without our fellow sisters who have doctorates like you and those who don't. Because what you're doing is giving us a platform so that we can share what we do. And people, even if 5 people tune in, that's 5 more people that may not have heard about how much we love Black people and how much we dedicate everything and our fiber and our being to advancing the cause of Black children getting the education they deserve.
Absolutely. And also let's give props to our ancestors who came before us, our progenitors, because I don't know what it was like to live in this country before civil rights. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed. It was horrible. Like many of them left the country. And, Langston Hughes talked about a dream deferred. Yes. And what happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, crust over? And that is what happened to many of our, our grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents before they were welcomed into a campus, in America. Their dreams were deferred. Yes. And now we can sit here in freedom dream.
Ashe, Ashe, beautifully said. Ashe. Thank you for that. Yeah. Wow.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
Can I ask you to read a poem? Do you mind? And I would love for you to read a poem and just talk about how that poem hit you. I mean, before we started our live, thank you for the beautiful reading of today. But I would love for you to read another poem, if you don't mind, and maybe talk about why that poem and what it has meant to you, because this is what gives me most joy, to know that I've written something, particularly when my sisters read it, and my sisters relate to it. I want all people to heal, but I am specifically concerned with Black women and our healing, particularly around love. So
I would love that, because I love poetry.
Yay.
And so sure, absolutely. So I am on page 87.
Okay, I'm gonna go. Oh, is that Tea with God?
It is the truth in
Black and blue. I know it was something in the Zarin section, but wow, isn't that appropriate for now? Woo.
Oh, let's do that one next. Then. I gotta put on my glasses because
I'm ready. I'm ready when you are. No, you're young and beautiful forever and ever.
Oh, thank you. Mm-hmm. So it says on page 87, the truth in Black and blue. The truth is, had you not spoken of Malcolm in the way that you did, had you not talked of your father and your love for him and his love for Malcolm, I would have made no room for you. If you had not been a Black man, I would have never given you any play, much less let you play with my heart. Because I'm not quite sure why I opened myself to you, given how I feel about those in blue. Even though you were Black and blue, you were still my choice. I admit something positive has come from this. My loathing has mellowed. I faced my own hypocrisy about loving all humankind, except those who wear badges. You challenged this by making me fall in love with you, in the sight of you, in blue, Black man. Mm-hmm. So this one touched me because, well, first of all, it's talking about a Black man. And the topic of interracial relationships, interracial marriages comes up often, especially, being a Black woman.
Yes.
And, between girlfriends, when you're younger, people ask you, would you, be with a
Would you
white man?
ever? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this or that type of man. And my answer was always like, no, I don't know. But as I got older, it was like, well, maybe I should consider, maybe dating outside of the race.
Mm-hmm.
So, this kind of seems like, and this was like one of my answers to one of my friends who asked me that one time. And I was like, wow, I actually said that before.
Wow.
Like why, relationships can be like a battlefield. Love is a battlefield. So why would I let someone else from another race hurt me? And that was surely, was one of my thoughts, one of my personal thoughts. So when I read this, it seems like he might be a policeman because it says blue.
Yes.
But the phrase Black and blue is like, the
bruising.
Bruises. Thank you.
Yes.
Bruises. So
right,
like I said, love is a battlefield, and the Black and blue is like, ooh, you fall in love with this man and you end up Black and blue, not on the outside, but on the inside.
Wow, you are definitely a critical, analyst of poetry. Aww. Your critical analysis is beautiful because I'll tell you, I don't think I thought about that. And this is what's so beautiful, Dr. Sylvia, about, talking to people about this poetry, because there's so much that I don't see, because much of this, of course, is written subconsciously. It just sort of comes out. Yeah. I was just dealing with the fact that he is a police officer, and I've always been, folks in my community, kind of on the other side of policing. We also began talking at a time when Black men were being shot down. It seemed like every other week. Philando Castile, Mike Brown. Every time you turn around, there was a Black man or woman or child being murdered. And that put a lot of strain on our friendship, our relationship, because he actually, I feel in many ways, had been, convinced against his own people, that he had been conditioned to see his own people in very much the way that I think a lot of racist white officers see Black people. And so that clearly was a tension for me, because here I am, an activist, and you're actually saying things are coming out of your mouth that I think are abhorrent, that you're saying about yourself, your people. Do you think you're better than your people?
Right.
Because you have a job which requires you to wear a badge? Like, where's that coming from? And so I just want to thank you for that brilliant analysis, because I definitely felt bruised on the inside. There was no domestic violence. Absolutely not. I wouldn't put up with that. And I'm not making any judgments, because I know people, a lot of women and men are abused too.
It happens.
They find themselves in situations for a score of reasons.
Right.
But I definitely was bruised. It was that relationship. I always say it like this, almost took me out. Like I really lost a lot of me.
Wow.
I really lost a lot of me.
And I can see that. It sounds like he lost a lot of him. And it kind of reminds me of your research on racial literacy, because, it's not just for our white brothers and sisters. It's for us,
Absolutely.
Because we've been conditioned, like you used that word, conditioned, and almost indoctrinated.
Absolutely.
Once we join the institution, we become part of the institution and institutionalized. And when I was an undergrad, some of my friends who were in criminal justice majors,
yes,
they said, you should hear the way they talk about us in these books. And because we were saying, like, in education, it's like they dog Black people, our Black children.
Dog us out.
About the bell curve.
Dog us out.
Yeah. And so in order to join, when you go into your profession, education, you go into law enforcement. It's like you already been indoctrinated. If
Yes.
you went through the preparation program, and
Yes.
they're conditioned to think that way. Not
Yes.
all of them, not everyone succumbs to it, but yeah. So I can see, being an educated, brilliant woman, and then, having someone who you love, have that same, experience.
Absolutely. And Dr. Sylvia, another light bulb moment. This has been, I cannot tell you how you have influenced
Oh,
so much of me seeing my model, understanding it in a different way. This is why interruption is so important, such an important part of the racial literacy development model, because we have to interrupt that thinking. So when you talk about us, particularly those of us that have these advanced degrees, passing through, getting that diploma in hand, there are certain beliefs that we either believed deeply or at least espoused in a paper. Like we at some point had to give that language back that they were giving to us. And that seeps into your spirit, that seeps into your mind. And so once we're conscious of the damage that has done, we have to interrupt it. So you just listening to you has really helped me really tonight go a bit deeper, more on the critical love piece, certainly the arc of self, and the interruption that's part of the model. So thank you for that.
I love that. And I, as I was speaking, I never thought of the word interruption. Like what does that mean scientifically in your research? And what does it mean in the model to interrupt?
Right, to stop, to interrupt the racist thinking, the racist behaviors, the racist ideology. Like when you understand it, when you have some consciousness of it, your job is to interrupt it. So you cannot learn that something you're thinking and doing as a teacher creates harm or perpetuates inequality. Learn it and continue to do it. That's maintaining the status quo. So the idea of interruption is to interrupt the status quo in your thinking, in that particular policy, and the belief. Interruption has to happen across the board. But what it signals is that it has to be an immediate stop. Stop, no, we're not doing this anymore. And then you figure out, okay, well then if I was thinking that and I'm interrupting it, what do I now need to understand to shift my perspectives and shift my thinking? And that interruption piece is key.
And that's that higher order thinking, because everyone don't live there.
It's true. It's true, because you know what? It's scary. It's scary to really go deep on something. A lot of folks stay at the surface, like even surface level diversity. That's my friend, Dr. Darryl Huggs. He talks about that. Because when you really start going deep and you start looking at yourself, that connects you to what? Your mama, your daddy, your community, your grandmama, your grandpa. And then you realize, and I'm talking specifically for white folks that are uncovering, these racist beliefs, that's what you grew up with. And it goes all the way back to people that you love dearly. That has said some of the most hateful, homophobic, sexist, religious biased things kind of around the dinner table.
It goes to the core.
It goes to the core. And so that's who you were raised by. So that impacts everything. So a lot of folks, they really don't go deep, 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 because it will require that we go into those stories, into those folks who raised us, to do that deep excavation. And that's frightening for a lot of people.
It is frightening, because it's almost as if you have to disown them in some way, or the traditions that they perpetuated.
That part, all of it. I say to some extent, it's almost akin to kind of suicide. And I don't make light of suicide, because I have I have a cousin who committed suicide a number of years ago, impacted the family even still. But it is a killing, metaphorically, it is a killing off of yourself as you know it. And so what are you going to replace it with? If I really see that it is only because of my phenotype, my skin color, that I'm getting certain treatments, And if I come to understand that and then begin to refuse, say, no, don't give me preferential treatment just because of the way I look, what's that going to do for your standing? It's what Toni Morrison said, right? Without your race, what are you? If I take your race away, what do you have?
Wow.
And so I think it's a frightening thought for people. And I think that is also part of what makes this work so slow, this anti-racist work so slow. That's just my kind of theory behind it.
And I believe in that. You know, it's slow, it's a slow moving ship, but it can be turned around. Absolutely. And we see how far we have come in thought as far as like how public opinion has changed, you know, since, let's say, the 60s even.
Right. No, you're right on it. Actually, before we got on here tonight, Teachers College is doing this week its convocation ceremonies. And so one of the guest speakers, the medalist, they give a medalist to an outstanding researcher, scholar, teacher, citizen, is Marzin, I think I'm saying her name incorrectly, so forgive me. I think it's Marzin Banaji, who is one of the co-developers of the term implicit bias. Really? And what she shared was one of her students really kind of jumped into this deep dive in the data, and she's showing us where biases and attitudes are beginning to change. A little bit slower on race, more so on sexuality, sexual orientation.
Yes.
A little slower on race and a little slower on skin color. But it's what you said. There is a change that's happening.
That's so just powerful, and it just gives us hope. You know, there's hope. It does.
And we need hope. Listen, education, that is the business of hope. If we as educators lose hope, then what do we have?
Right. Yeah. And we have to forge the way. And I mentioned this before we went live, like the educators should really be our thinkers, our thought leaders, so to speak. Because sometimes we give too much credence to popularity, what's popular in our culture, you know, like music and athletes, you know, sports. But really our educators are the ones who have studied, you know, human psychology and the social sciences. And, you know, we should be, and not me, but, you know.
No, you know, let's get us up there. Let's get us.
Ivy League scholars.
Let's get us up there.
Yeah, should be in the mainstream and celebrated, you know, for your work. And just to talk a little bit more about your work, your research on racial literacy, and, you know, what other topics are you researching and what's next? For you?
Sure. Thank you. Beautiful question. I'm happy to say that I do other things, write other books besides poetry books. And I have, as I mentioned to you before the live, a new poetry book coming out called The Peace Chronicles in the summer. But in about another week or two, May 7th to be exact, I've co-authored a book with my colleague, another professor at Teachers College, Dr. Dietra Price-Dennis. And we have a book called Advancing Racial Literacies in Teacher Education, Activism Towards Equity in Digital Spaces. So it is the digital literacies and the racial literacies coming together. And we're super excited because we will be in conversation with Dr. Ruha Benjamin, who is a professor from Princeton University that has written 2 books and focuses on race and technology. So that's what's coming out. I just had a policy brief distributed through the National Council for Teachers of English on racial literacy.
Really?
And and that's getting some traction. One of 3 briefs that were released by the National Council for Teachers of English. And as I mentioned to you yesterday, I just wrote a poem about racial literacy that's going to be published as well. So
can we hear it, or do we have to wait?
You know, actually, I don't mind sharing a little bit of it. It's a little long, and I know we have to go soon. Yeah. But I would love to. You tell me how many. It's about a 2 or 3 minute poem, but tell me how much time do I have? I can just do a teaser.
You have all the time that you need. And then after you finish this poem, I just have one more question for you, and then we can close it up.
Absolutely. So this
Okay.
poem, and I want to share with you that my process is, it just comes to me. So
Mm.
I gave a keynote and at a conference, and part of that keynote is that then I could write something based on the keynote and it would be published in a journal. So
Hmm.
I'm a little bit late, and I met with the students last Friday, and they said, well, you know, Dr. Yoli, you could just write a poem. You're a poet. And I started looking at the slides. By the third slide, something just came over me. And so this is what came out.
Okay.
And this was yesterday morning.
Wow.
Racial literacy poetics for the academy and beyond. Racial literacy is a skill, a practice that dares you to see your neighbors as human, to respect their existence and support their resistance when their humanity is at stake. Racial literacy calls you, tells you, invites you to bend towards justice and break your silence on isms and phobias that infect society. It abhors the destruction of Black and brown bodies and uprises to a crescendo when tasers and wallets and sandwiches and Skittles are mistaken for guns. Co-conspiring towards justice, the racially literate put our minds and bodies on the line while our souls march towards freedom's destiny. We meet our ancestors on arrival. Racial literacy rejects daily police killings, scaling walls of justice instead of white houses. It requires truth telling of an archaeology of the self, family, institutions that you worship. In the Church of the Academy, racial literacy is a foreign language that must be taught and learned. It is how one begins and continues to fight to restore what we all have been given at birth, what others have stolen away, leaving a soul bereft of peace and a stranger to love. Racial literacy dreams justice, talks about setting souls free from anxiety, fear, uncertainty. It leads with critical love, seeking to penetrate that love through our vocations and the mask we wear in the face of the world's most pressing problems.
Mm.
Racial literacy talks of 400 years of inequality. It echoes the words of Baldwin, nothing can be changed until it is faced. We face the truth that race is a lie, socially constructed, not rooted in biology, but boasting real and complete consequences that wreaks havoc on the lives of those who built this country out of blood and sweat, those whose land was stolen in manifest marches and movements towards a destiny that meant claiming and conquering what was not yours.
Mm.
Change is inevitable. Like the tides, the season, our minds, change will come when there is a collective will for equity and a disdain for myths of meritocracy, false sentiments of equality, and true justice for all. Racial
Wow.
literates incite the change and bring the nation to the tipping point of what it professed long ago, before you or I came to be. Racial literacy is a practice. It probes the existence of racism and examines the effects of its damage on our experiences. Racial literates have the skill to discuss and dismantle centuries-old lies of superiority. Racial literacy desires constructive talk, requires a stance that knows the difference between being not racist and anti-racist. Yes, there is a difference. Racial literates know there is no neutrality in the fight for humanity. There is no sitting still or standing by, upstanding against excuse making and fantasies that evoke distorted memories of not seeing race, only seeing people. That sentence makes no sense. It never did. In America, it never will. Racial
Mm.
literacy is reading, discussing, writing a world devoid of racism and the myth of race. It seeks to reach truths that help us discover what we've always knew. Everyone is equal. Racial literacy implores the shift from liberalism, that free-thinking, non-racist kumbaya approach to maintaining the status quo by speaking in borrowed tongues, ventriloquist of radical love. Racial literacy rejects the mere speaking and expects talk of freedom, dreaming the world we seek, one we know can exist the moment we dare to be the light that haunts us, guides us, is us. Racial literacy will free us eventually. It will release us from static quo-ness and shift us from the liberalism that traps us in the quagmire that subjugates bodies of glorious colors. Racial literacy activates the anti-racist stance, the only leg on which to stand, the only road to take and make while walking the path that leads to freedom, equality, and justice for all.
Aw, wow.
Thank you for listening to that.
Oh my God. Thank you for sharing that. I mean,
It's a long one.
phenomenal.
Wow,
Phenomenal.
thank you. Thank
Oh,
you. That's
yes.
racial literacy. So that's my research in poetic form. That's my
Brilliant.
research in poetic
Brilliant.
form.
And I can see you opening up every professional development with that. You know, every teacher, you know, before we delve into this deep dive, you know, of what it is, let's just talk about this poem. You know, let's just read this poem. And it's an icebreaker, you know.
Thank
if
you.
anything else.
You know, I think I will read it certainly for PDs. I was thinking that as I continue the book talks, that it's a way to open up the book talk as well. But thank you for that. Again, you're giving me all these gems, Dr. Sylvia.
I mean, Dr. Yolanda, we celebrate you. I mean, you're like our rock star in education and in Black America, you know. I mean, we know about Dr. Cornell West, you know, and I think there's another one, but, you know, there's a Black woman as well, you know, who's an Ivy League professor who we need to know about in, you know, mainstream America, because you have so much to share.
Thank
you.
And
my last question to you is, what is your legacy? Like, what do you want everyone to remember about Yolanda Sealey-Ruiz?
Wow, thank you for that question. You know, I'm always bringing up people's names. So a former student who's now a professor, Dr. Keisha McIntosh Allen, has encouraged me to think about what kind of ancestor I want to be.
Aww.
And I asked people that, you know, from her prompting, and I want to be the kind of ancestor that if a child of color, Black child specifically, comes across anything I've written, any speech I've made, that they know that I have done everything in my body, in my fiber, to fight for equality in education for them. That's what I want in education.
Okay.
In terms of my ancestral lineage with my daughter, I want her to talk about me as an ancestor, as a mother who believed in her, who pushed her to follow her dreams, and to let her know that, you know, being a Black Latina, you know, in this world is something beautiful and special and wonderful. That's the kind of ancestor I want to be, that I have made someone else's life easier somehow with the work that I've done.
Yes. Well, you certainly have. I mean, just being able to articulate, you know, our feelings in a sophisticated and educated way helps us all. You know,
thank you.
You've done that brilliantly. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for tonight. Thank you for tonight. This has been such a joy to be with you, to be on your show. Thank you for inviting me. It has meant so much to me.
Likewise, my pleasure. And thank you again. Thank you for allowing me to disrupt your busy schedule. And I know you've been on all day and you're so graceful and beautiful about it. Thank you so much. And I hope we can connect again in the future.
I would love that. I would love that. Have a beautiful evening, Dr. Sylvia. Thank you for all that you do.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.